Today's film has nothing to do with Tony Scott's Domino or Brian De Palma's Domino. In fact, it has to do with the world of domino toppling, yet I hope that Tony Scott and Brian De Palma fans enjoy it. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, we have a really fun episode for you today. This is the winner of the South by Southwest 2021 Documentary Grand Jury Prize. The film is Lily Topples The World. And yes, it is about domino toppling, these elaborate artistic endeavors that take days to create and only seconds to strike down. It's a fascinating film, and we have writer, director, editor, producer Jeremy Workman with us today to chat about Lily Topples The World. This is technically an artistic process documentary. So I love these because it shows both the artist creating and what it takes to create these works of art, but it also shows the logistics and, you know, the business side, dare I say, and some of Lily's business dreams, which is really fascinating to get into. So I got to say, it's pretty easy to see how the South by Southwest Film Festival awarded this their Grand Jury Prize, because it's a great movie about being creative. So, you know, you could watch this documentary in its entirety on Discovery Plus. If you don't currently have Discovery Plus, you could get in on a free 7-day trial membership and watch it that way. But I'm really happy with today's interview because Jeremy was great at taking us behind the scenes, letting us know what it took to make this documentary. And documentaries are never easy to make, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You know, you can read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. If you've never read us before, I hope you'll take a test drive and you could read our free issue, our entire free issue over at backstory.net or in our iPad app Backstory. And if you like what you see, I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. And if you want to subscribe, I'm here to sweeten the deal with discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. And we are publishing our brand new Dune issue soon, which is going to be packed with so many cool things. It is a really full issue, so it is robust, my friends. You will enjoy it, and I encourage you when we release it to go check out our table of contents and see what's inside of it that you might like. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers and the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoom videos go. It would be great to have you support my passion project. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with writer, director, producer, editor Jeremy Workman to discuss his latest documentary film, Lily Topples The World. Jeremy, it's good to have you. Good to see you, man.
Great to be here. My second time.
Well, so, you know, we did not get your last film, actually, World Before Your Feet. I guess that's a easy place to start. What was your biggest lesson on that informed you as a filmmaker kind of moving forward for Lily?
Yeah, so that was my previous documentary, The World Before Your Feet. It came out in theaters in like 2018, 2019. Did great. You know, it was a great experience. Got like a pretty, you know, robust release. It's still playing in weird countries. You know, I think that was a very unique subject where it was about Matt Green, who's this 37-year-old guy who is walking every street of New York City. And I filmed him over 2 or 3 years. And I was the camera person. I was the editor. There was no crew. It was just me and him, like out in the streets of New York City. So I think what that taught me, it really did apply to Lily quite a bit, because it sort of taught me, you know, I could do a little bit of the one-man band as a filmmaker. I could really immerse myself with my characters in a way that I thought would work really well with Lily. And it just kind of gave me, you know, confidence to be like, okay, cool. I'm just going to go shoot it and edit. I don't need a big crew. I could show up with Lily anywhere and just, you know, get what I need. And so it was, and it also kind of like weirdly informed Lily, because I was still releasing, and like World Before Your Feet was still coming out, and I was shooting Lily. So it was sort of concurrent a little bit.
And it's good that you had that confidence moving forward. I want to go back to Magical Universe from 2013. I do think of that movie, not just because we've known each other a long time, but I do think of it every now and then because it really is this interesting character study of Al, the artist who really created his own universe to kind of get away from the rest of us. But it's so artistic. It's great. What was something on that kind of informed your other work? Because really, since that movie, you've had this knack of finding these unique protagonists that you frame your entire piece around, that immerses us into their world that we otherwise would really never see.
By the way, you and I are both immersed in virtual worlds right now. So,
yes, we are.
Your viewers and listeners who can't see us over right now, we're both in like these weird virtual Zoom settings.
Yes, yes. It all goes onto the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, and nice. I chose the Black Lodge from Twin Peaks ever since the pandemic started, saying that we're all kind of stuck there for a little while. But tell us about Al and his art.
So, yeah, I've been having a little run here with kind of these kind of interesting documentaries about specific characters, a lot of characters who are, really consumed by their passions, or they're, really extreme, or they're obsessive artists. And Lily is maybe the most mainstream of them, but it goes back a couple films now, and we had previously done a great interview when my documentary Magical Universe came out. So that was probably like 2014, 2015, when it finally came out in theaters in LA. So that was about a very unique elderly artist who was living in Maine, who like in his entire house was filled with Barbie doll art and Barbie doll collages and Barbie dolls. And I filmed him on and off for a few years. And it became this film about me and my like friendship with him. But it has this sort of, it's this very unusual movie. It's not for everybody, but people who are like really kind of in the arts, or people that are really creative, really kind of connect with it. I think it's the story a little bit about creativity and kind of sticking with your creativity and sticking with your passion. So yeah, so that was another one where I was just kind of like, I made the movie, I shot it, I edited it, and then it was released. That went out with IFC Films. So yeah, that was just a cool movie. And I guess that was the last time I was on with a movie on your
Q&A. And didn't you discover him like on a hike or something? Like it was.
Yeah. So the story with that was that it's one of these movies where the filmmaker's in it. I'm in that movie, which is not something I want to continue doing. And that was sort of the first and only time I did that. But I had met this very strange artist who was kind of living in a house all alone. And for the past multiple decades, literally 40, 50 years, he was just kind of in his attic making Barbie doll art. That was like,
right.
It's outsider art, but it was kind of also outsider photography. He was an outsider filmmaker. So I made this kind of, this kind of really, what I think is a really unique movie that kind of gets into him and deals with has a lot, almost as if it's like a movie sprouting out of his mind a little bit. And
yeah, it's about his artistic process. And I like artistic process movies. And also I remember at the time, like you had some of his art, and unfortunately he's passed away since then. Do you still have some of his art?
I do, so he created these very unique collages, Barbie doll collages. In fact, I think as recently as, I want to say 3 days ago, somebody over Twitter reached out to me and was like, hey, do you still have any Al Carby art? And I do. I became, and it's sort of revealed in the movie a little bit, but I became almost like his voice, his only connection to the outside world. And that also included a lot of the caretaking of his art after he passed away. It's a neat, weird movie. It connects with a lot of people that are very like sort of, have a creative bent. Magical Universe, you could find it, on Amazon, or, I think it's even, I saw recently, for those that know about Plex and Plex TV, it was recently up on Plex. So yeah, it's just kind of like
Plex is an app you could get. It's a free app, and it's for free on their app. So you could just get the Plex app and you could watch it there.
Yeah, Magical Universe. It's a cool one. And I think, it is strange. It's a very strange, unique, odd movie, but it kind of like weirdly informs how I've been making documentaries. It informs how I thought about making with Lily, how that came about, So, it definitely follows this kind of pattern from Magical Universe to The World Before Your Feet to Lily Topples The World to the next projects that I'm working on now.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I really do. It's not because we know each other. I do think of his art every couple months, just because I like a recluse, right? Yeah. And he needed an escape from the world, and he created one. And it was and it's just fun because he's just so happy in it.
And that's
something I love.
He's, the documentary is about like almost me discovering him and sort of revealing him to the world in a weird way. This is a little bit of a spoiler, but it's fine. The movie climaxed with him having a museum show. Right. And it literally is like the first time in 40, 50 years that he like practically like leaves his house. So it's pretty remarkable just in terms of like his story. And it's one of these movies that I just go to weird places and people come up to me and they're like, oh my God, I've seen that movie 7 times. Or people reach out to me over email and I watch that movie every year. So yeah, it's cool.
It's cool. I highly recommend folks to check it out. Okay. So look, I want to give people a baseline on you. You went to Columbia, right?
That's right.
And so, getting out of school, you have your hustle and just, you and I met when we were interns for Joel Silver. And what was something silly and surreal that you remember interning for Silver as we did way back when? Because I had quite an experience as well. What was something that like you remember?
So your listeners should realize, I know they all sort of know you quite well from all your interviews, but I've known you even longer. I've known you for several years, many years now, going back to when we were just both, young kind of film kind of students and film, aspiring film people. So I worked for Joel Silver. I was like sort of his personal assistant. It was kind of one of my first jobs in the industry. And you could imagine it was totally wild and totally crazy and a million sort of amazing stories. I wasn't so much tied into like Silver Pictures where I was reading scripts and doing coverage. I was literally like getting his dry cleaning and going out and, taking care of his girlfriend's dog and driving around. And, I was given an official car, the Silver Pictures, like, mini truck. And I would just tool around town, doing errands for him. I was working in his warehouse. It was just very bizarre and very awesome.
But like his warehouse has like all this weird memorabilia from all of his films, right? You would always come back with stories of like
stunning. It was like, you'd be in there and there'd be like piles of boxes of like Lethal Weapon materials and even, older movies that he was involved in and stuff, there'd be all kinds of art stuff from Hudsucker Proxy or Demolition Man, it was
that was actually, so I was there when they were getting ready to make Hudsucker, I think. And I had stayed on longer because I was out here in Los Angeles and you had to go back to the East Coast. But like the one thing I'll say about Joel, and you could say many things about Joel Silver, was I do remember him being on the phone screaming his head off at somebody. And I was in development, so I'd always like slip you the scripts that were going around that was cool. And we would talk about them. But he was defending the Coen brothers. And he was screaming at somebody. I don't remember who or what, but it was specifically to get them something that they wanted in the film that somebody wasn't going to get them. And really his job was just to scream his head off until he got them what they needed. And that was it. And I thought it was like kind of awesome.
Yeah, there was a lot of screaming. I was, like I said, I was often on the side where like I had to get the, his iced teas and those kind of things. So like I wasn't in, though I remember having to go, drive stuff around when the Coen brothers were in LA. And it was just a totally unusual like partnership between the Coen brothers and Silver Pictures. But, if everybody, now knows Hudsucker, it was like this weird big budget movie that, needed this kind of mega producer behind it. Yeah, it was crazy because like I would, there'd be moments where I'd have to go pick up like Stallone. And I remember one of the funny stories that I remember that I've told a couple of times is I remember being in the car driving Joel around and him shrieking because some journalist, kind of wrote kind of a negative story about him and, just wrote a bunch of just about him as a producer and this sort of Hollywood guy. And at one point he starts shrieking in the phone that the journalist called him perspicacious. And he's like, you called me. What is this journalist saying? Perspicacious. What is this? What is this? And here I was like driving in the front seat. And I'm like, excuse me, Joel, perspicacious is actually a really great compliment. He's calling you really smart. So yeah, that was like a sort of a funny.
Those journalists, man, they're the worst.
Yeah.
There's nothing more traumatic than graduating college and wanting to do something in film because you got to figure out a hustle, and you did. You became a editor of trailers, and you worked on films as well. But just something to point out, only because Matrix Revolutions is coming out soon. Mm-hmm. I know that there was a time when you were at the trailer company that was originally editing the Matrix trailer for the first movie. And it was difficult because they didn't have the footage they needed to see what the movie meant. They just had some previs as placeholder, which kind of meant, like, as you said it to me, that Matrix was either going to be great and amazing when they dropped this stuff in, or it was going to be a dog like Johnny Mnemonic,
there was a lot of Johnny Mnemonic.
Yeah, and by the way, there's parts of Johnny Mnemonic I love, but it was weird. What do you remember about editors just trying to figure out what to do for that trailer?
Quite a lot, So just to give a little backstory to this is I got into editing very early, and we'll get into that. My father is a filmmaker, and we'll mention that and talk about that. But so I was like really exposed to kind of high-end industry editing from a very early age. And I found myself in college with an Avid, like I was doing professional editing when I was probably a sophomore or junior in college. Like I had an Avid that I would rent sometimes in junior year. This was the days when people didn't have Avids, on laptops. It was, you remember, it was like, they were giant pieces of equipment, they came with furniture.
Right. We were the generation that was coming out learning to do Avid in film school.
Exactly.
Which provided for great pay getting out of college, actually.
Yeah.
Because I did freelance Avid editing as well for a while. Mm-hmm. And the pay was great. But people would rent them. People that wanted to start their own production companies had to think of it as like a second mortgage.
Yeah.
In which if they bought it,
six figures, they were incredibly expensive to rent.
They were six figures, and
like I said, they came with furniture. It was just ridiculous. So I had made my first documentary and was on PBS, and I was still technically still in college in a weird way. And
which one are you talking about?
Jaglom, who is Henry Jaglom, and that a trailer house in New York City had seen it on PBS and said wow, whoever edited this kind of did some cool montages, was able to use a lot of clips and do some cool stuff. And I found myself working, being invited in and working at a company in New York that's still one of the top trailer companies, Geronimo, where I started a career as a trailer editor. And I was extremely young. I was I was maybe 10 years younger than everybody editing there. Maybe even more. I was on this kind of weird fast track where I was in my early 20s and I was already starting to work on big Hollywood movies, including the Matrix movies, Scream movies, a lot of the stuff in that kind of famous Harvey Weinstein heyday. And Matrix came in, and I didn't do the trailer, but I worked on the campaign. I worked on some TV spots. The trailer done by a great trailer editor, Phil Decord. But I was one of the editors on the overall campaign. And I remember when it came in, everybody dogged it. Everybody. Just a lot of Johnny Mnemonic jokes, a lot of this is, you got to watch, almost everybody was watching it you got to see this terrible Keanu Reeves, rough cut that came in. You got to watch this. Look how ridiculous this is. And it's funny because my father was involved in the early days with helping out with the Star Wars campaign, right? And this was,
what did he do on it?
He was kind of in the group that also was involved in the behind the scenes, in some of the marketing, some of the trailer stuff, right? So he was kind of part of that kind of group in Hollywood that was helping out on that. And he tells a similar story where they all sat around and watched it, and everybody was like, oh, this is going to be this dog that's just going to lose money, and also was missing effects. And so that was kind of, it's a good lesson for everybody.
Do you remember a shot? Is there a shot that like stuck with you in previs for The Matrix?
The opening scene, gunshot scene, and I remember it was just looked so bad and so ridiculous. And I remember I say this now, and maybe I'm kind of rewriting history a little bit. I remember I was like one of the few people that actually was like, wait, this could be cool, but nobody thought it was going to look good.
I mean, I'll never forget. I knew Greg Silverman, an executive at Warner Brothers, and had lunch with him at some point before it had come out. And, Warner Brothers was really supportive of the Wachowskis. Yeah. And Silver,
and Silver, of course, just tying into Joel Silver. Yeah, this is, The Matrix is a Joel Silver movie.
And Greg was trying to explain to me bullet time over lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
And just tell me how great this movie was going to be. And I had him explain it twice, and he finally was able to. And it was so complicated, some of the ways that they were explaining it at the time, especially because he was really explaining the camera setup of all these motion control cameras.
Which that whole visual effects was done by somebody who was outside of the Hollywood visual effects world. It was, and
he wound up winning an Oscar for it.
Yeah, exactly. So it was just not the way that a lot of people were approaching these kind of Hollywood movies at the time. Yeah, it didn't look like it. It didn't nothing.
No, all right. I want to get to Lily in a second, but I think it's interesting to point out your dad, Chuck Workman. The world knows him. A lot of people for obviously his documentaries, but also for the amazing montages that he cut together during the Oscars. And they kind of became famous. They've even been spoofed before in movies. And it's interesting because the path that he went on with Calliope Pictures, his company, is he would do industrials sometimes to keep the lights on. And then he would go and make his documentaries as well. And that's eventually what you did after you became, a trailer editor. Is you started Wheelhouse in New York City, and you do trailers. And I know I think you've edited a film or two as well.
Sure.
What would you say that you learned from watching your dad navigate that space of, making sure to be responsible, work within the industry, but then occasionally go off to do a passion project where you have your control and you're able to, get things down the way that you want, which is a luxury that you do have to work hard for.
100%, and there is such a sort of a clear line, where I was sort of growing up and sort of watching him work, where he was able to kind of, navigate and figure out angles so that he could continue making documentaries, and being able to sort of do professional work within the industry to get that, make it so that you could keep doing your own projects. And that was something that was, obviously hugely impactful for me, and something that I do now. As you mentioned, I have a company in New York City called Wheelhouse Creative, where we're doing a ton of trailers. We're doing a ton of movie marketing stuff. It's mostly skewed towards indies and docs. So it's not like we're working on like Marvel Comics stuff. We're working on, the latest documentaries that are coming out. Though we do a lot of shooting of movie marketing stuff for A24. So there's sometimes a lot of like cooler movies that we're working on. But so that's kind of, as you said, sort of my side hustle that I've sort of developed. What happened was I was working at that company, Geronimo, doing big Hollywood trailers. And I realized like, wow, there's not a big side to this in the indie world. Indie documentaries were exploding. Indie films were exploding. And I was like, okay, there seems to be a real place to do movie marketing and bring that kind of Hollywood style of editing trailers to that world. So that I developed that company with my partner, my Wheelhouse partner, Rob Lyons, and we've been sort of going strong for a while now. And what it's allowed me to do is precisely what you said, where I could sort of pursue my documentaries, continue to pursue them, make them under my own terms, not really worry about having to make a salary on the documentaries, which is really important because it's really hard to make documentaries. It's very difficult. And if you are trying to do it just as a way where you're trying to make money, you're going to have to compromise what you want to do. So looking at my father, and who was also doing that and doing that for a number of years and doing that successfully, mostly with his gigs, as you said, where he was doing montages on the Oscars. He was doing, and again, for your listeners, if you remember, like in the 80s and 90s, when they would have those incredible montages, he was often doing those. So those would pay for a lot of his year. And then he would go off and do documentaries, sometimes small ones, sometimes, ones that were kind of bigger.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just having a flashback. I remember at one point, Hugh Hefner hired your dad.
Yeah.
To do a history of pornography.
Yeah. It's called Story of X.
Yes. And literally you had to hire, one of the first things you do in a documentary is you break down what your footage was. And there was actual legit porn from the silent era. Yeah. That was being cataloged, and those were just the silliest stories. But I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah, but just on a side note of that, that wasn't like a porno documentary. It was a documentary looking at the history of pornography in American film industry. Really interesting.
It was crazy to know that there was actual legit silent film era 1920s pornography.
It sort of came. It was sort of Hugh got interested in that, sort of post Boogie Nights, and wow, there was this sort of history of pornography in America that hasn't really been explored. Yeah. So my father was doing that documentary, as he had done a number of documentaries that were about sort of history, survey films about Hollywood in a way. And definitely all this was really impactful for me, because it just kind of, not only did it, as you mentioned, teach me this idea of okay, make your projects, do projects, but then also being able to sort of navigate it so you could do your own films. But it also I was exposed to all these interesting, editing, different ways of editing, different approaches to making movies, ways that you could make documentaries on the cheap, ways that you could do stuff that was sort of unconventional, and using editing in ways that were really cool. And so all that was hugely important to me.
It's interesting with getting to Lily Topples The World, it kind of has this roots of being very similar at times to Magical Universe, because she is so immersed, but also different, in which she's the opposite of Al from that movie, in which by the time you meet her, she already has a huge YouTube following. Tell us, this is the most boring question ever, so please rush through it. Tell us how this came together and how you first found her. I know you probably answered that a million times, but how did this project come together, and what did you see in it at the beginning that led you to saying, you know what, I do think there's a movie here?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think it connects to some of these larger themes. I'm interested in looking at people who are doing these passionate things. I'm not really interested in documentaries that are political tracks. I'm not so much interested in documentaries as journalism. I'm not so much interested in social issue docs. I watch them, I love them, but what I'm really interested is in people and characters, and trying to sort of do something really kind of cinematic. I'm a big movie buff, and I'm kind of trying to think of ways how can we kind of take documentary and do really kind of interesting character studies that are both cinematic and immersive and all that. So that's a little bit of a setup of what I'm interested in. And I think that led a little bit to Lily. As far as the actual, okay, how did this happen and why? So Lily, for everybody listening, if you're not familiar, she is the world's most accomplished domino toppling artist. I started filming her when she was 19 years old. Her medium is domino toppling, but she puts it on YouTube, where she has over 3 million followers. As you said, when I started filming her when she was 19, she had over 1 million followers. So in the 2 or 3 years of me filming her, she suddenly, her subscriber count just blew up. And she's Asian American. She was adopted. She grew up in New Hampshire. She was the only Asian American girl growing up in her town. So, there was a really compelling story there that kind of connected with a lot of the themes that we've already talked about. Somebody who just is pursuing their passion in a way. And, obviously Lily is extremely successful, but she is still, it's almost like if she wasn't successful, she'd still be doing exactly what she's doing.
Exactly. That's what I liked about it. Cause sometimes it really didn't matter whether the world embraced what she was doing or not. Because she would still be doing it just like Al. Exactly.
So how it came about was, it was the first film where I had ever approached somebody as a fan. And that was different. In my previous films, the other thing, and this connects to what you were talking about with like having my side hustle and being able to kind of make my documentaries on my own terms, is I'm also, in some ways, I'm often developing my own material. And I'm also, kind of the engine of what my documentaries are going to be, which is also something that I feel really excited about and privileged that I'm able to do this. I could sort of look and be like, okay, this is something that I think could work as a documentary. Let me kind of pursue that. With Lily, I had just finished The World Before Your Feet. I'm sorry, I was editing. I was in the middle of editing The World Before Your Feet. It was this incredibly difficult editing job. It was over 500 hours of a guy walking through New York City without
walking through every street in New York City.
Every single street in every borough. So not just Manhattan. It totals about 9,000 miles. So he had been doing that for years and years, and I had been filming him through a lot of it. And I had accumulated just so much footage. And there's no story. And the movie came out really, I'm really proud of it, but the footage wasn't really like screaming out story. He's not doing it to raise for charity. He's not doing it because he's dying.
He's an obsessive, which fits into everything that you've been doing.
Exactly. So I was editing that often until 2 or 3 in the morning, sometimes later. It was really difficult. And I would often find myself at the end of the night just totally exhausted. And I would be sitting on my couch. And as a way to kind of reset before I went to sleep, I would turn on YouTube. And I would often find myself going down a rabbit hole of domino toppling videos. And I was just like kind of got obsessed about it. And I was just watching a ton of domino top videos. And I was like, wow, there's this weird community on YouTube. Wow, there's all these unique artists. Look at what they're doing. Oh my God, they're revolutionizing this. I was first interested in a strange domino artist named Flippy Cat, who is sort of like he's sort of like the Banksy of domino art. Nobody's ever seen him. And he does a lot of great domino art on YouTube. And I was really interested in him. And then it slowly I started realizing that all roads on anything with dominoes was leading to Lily. And I was just like, wow, who is this girl? She's this young girl. You see her parents, they're not Asian. She was developing this huge following, this kind of, support system on YouTube. And I thought that was so interesting, that how Gen Z is navigating content creation. That's also a really interesting story that's different from like us and people even in their 30s, how young Gen Z is now creating content on their own, doesn't need a studio, doesn't need anyone to say yet, give them green lights. They just make content. So I thought that was really interesting. And I just became a fan of hers, and I reached out to her, and just was like, look, I just wanted to say hello and maybe meet you. And we kind of from there were like, could there be a movie? And I pitched it to her, and she wasn't sure. And I met her family. And from there, she said, okay, why don't we start shooting a little bit to see? Right. And that was maybe like in a December. And in January, I was in her dorm room at college filming her and all her friends. And, the other good way that if you're able to not worry about like raising a lot of money for a documentary, if you could just get a little bit of money or if you have equipment or you feel confident shooting yourself, you could go shoot stuff and then, of course, make like a sizzle reel and those kind of things. So that was kind of the mindset a little bit at the beginning of Lily, and right away I was in college with her filming, and we weren't necessarily sure if there was going to be a documentary here or whether we were exploring a little bit.
Right. I mean, was it ever going to become a YouTube short? Because you would have no idea, right?
I think, I was talking to YouTube a little bit during that process. I don't think we really knew, I think I was like, let me just keep shooting. And it was very compelling right from the beginning, because right when I started, Lily was grappling with this very big, colossal, decision for her.
We're going to save that for the spoilers section. So, because you really did come into her life at the right time.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess at the beginning, is there any sort of a design document that you use, because you're really just going on a journey of discovery with your subject to see what happens in their life? And, there's a chance that Lily's life might have actually been on a straight path. Yeah. Of continuing to just domino topple as she wanted to and have no other extraneous events that happen in your movie happen. And people still would have been fascinated to just learn about her. But is there any sort of a design document that you can make in the beginning? Because there can't be, right? Because you have to.
I mean, you're hoping to hit it, and that it's going to be compelling and it's going to be able to carry for a feature film. But, I think secretly you're not ever really certain. And one strategy that I have been doing is I shoot a lot. And I often shoot a lot in the first 3 months. I shoot a lot right at the beginning of a project. Just get tons of coverage. See if I can get 25, 30 hours right up, in the first month or so. And then I look at that closely and I'm like, okay, could this work as a feature? Is this going to really hold up? With Lily, we knew right away. I knew right away. I was like, okay, this is going to be really compelling. There's all these great themes here, but I don't necessarily know on some other, on The World Before Your Feet. I didn't know, and I'm working on a project now where it's sort of like Lily, where I'm like, yeah, this is gonna be great, but it's part of that process where it is reality. And you can't just, it's not scripted. So you're not walking into a production company with a script and you're like, okay, this is how it's going to be. And you sort of outline it. I do outline a little bit, but sometimes that's a wish list, okay, I want it to be this way. I hope it's going to be this way. Right. We're going to follow her as her career develops, but you're not sure.
All right. Geeky question. What kind of camera were you shooting on?
Great question. I shoot everything with Canons. I shoot with Canon C300s, C200s, C100s, and now I'm shooting with a Canon C70. Okay. So what's cool about all these cameras is that they're, cinema quality. They're beautiful. They look great, but I could do a lot of shooting myself. I'm not a great shooter. I'm pretty good. I feel like I'm a great editor, but I'm a pretty good shooter, not amazing.
Yes, so, I remember some stuff that we shot together way back in the day, and you had some trouble with some brightness, my friend.
Sure,
but luckily the camera handles all that. Well, wait, so wait a minute. When you shoot all this footage, you're coming up with all this stuff. What do you do to make sure that you don't lose it? Because the most tragic thing that happens in a documentary is if there's a problem with the footage. So you have it all on these cards. You have to transfer them obviously to drives. Do you clone every single drive? So you have
right now I use cloud, and okay. I clone and back up, and I have this very robust cloud system where my cloud system has 30 terabytes of footage on there. Yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy. All right. Well, so another question really quick. Don't spend too long on it, because I want to get deeper into Lily in a second. Sure. It's a filmmaker's dream to do what you did, which is get the Grand Jury Award at South by Southwest this year in 2021. And you get to be in those meetings, where people are making offers on your film.
Sure.
And this sold to Discovery Plus. That's how people can see Lily right now. If you don't have Discovery Plus, you could get a 7-day free trial and watch Lily that way. But so what was it like to kind of be behind the scenes in that place that, you hadn't been before,
Totally. It was definitely, it was fun and exciting. And just as you mentioned, you know, I've been so much making these documentaries like on my own and kind of like putting them on my back and not really thinking about, you know, big sales and big, you know, bidding wars and those kind of things. Those aren't really things that I have been trying to go after. I'm not trying to go after a Katy Perry documentary. You know, I'm making these sort of, you know, kind of oddball movies that are very sort of specific and very unique. So with Lily, yes, it was at South by, it won the grand jury award. And suddenly there was like a lot of interest in the movie. And there was a lot of, you know, it was that classic thing that I'm sure a lot of your listeners have read about, where like you're at a film festival and you're holed up in a room and the phones are burning, the phone lines are burning, and you're getting emails and you're hearing this company's interested and this company's interested and that company is ready to make an offer. And we felt like with Discovery, and we went with Discovery Plus, which was cool because they just sort of launched this new vision of being a real player in the documentary world. And they have this sort of great sort of mindset. Of course, in the weeks ahead, they merged with like HBO and Warner Brothers. So that was kind of also part of, you know, we were kind of hearing a little about that. But yeah, it was wild because we decided to go with Discovery because they were so just passionate about it. And we just thought it connected so much with their audience. And, you know, they've also been like acquiring like a lot of great documentaries. Introducing Selma Blair is on Discovery Plus. Rebel Hearts, which was at Sundance, was on Discovery Plus. So it just like was like a really good fit for us. But it was kind of, like I said, it was kind of like what I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard, where you're just kind of like, wow,
that's cool.
Yeah. Wow. Big offers are coming in and deals. And it was exciting. And I don't know if it's going to be like that on all my projects, but it was certainly something cool.
Well, that's cool. So, all right, we're getting into the spoilers now. So podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify, YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page that are watching us from this Zoom, which is where they all go to. Press pause if you have not yet seen Lily Topples The World. Go watch it on Discovery Plus. Come back. We're getting into the spoilers. You were touching on it earlier. Like when you started filming Lily, she's in college. She's talking nonstop about how much she loves college, loves the friendships that she's formed. And then she has a big decision in which she realizes she wants to do domino toppling full time and she doesn't want to complete college. Now, as a parent, I'm sitting there thinking, gosh, I hope this is like a tragic question and she comes back to college. But for the path that she's on in the movie, no, it totally makes sense for her to drop out. And it was fascinating. And it would seem to me that that's the point at which you probably realized, oh, this is going to be an interesting documentary about a young woman finding herself in the world after stopping school, but to pursue what she loves, which she kind of already was the master on.
Yeah. So exactly, you know, she was in college, she was having all these she was constantly conflicted. She's surrounded by all these, you know, people that were becoming her friends. And this is a girl who I think was having a lot of trouble making friends throughout leading up to college. You know, she talks about it in the film. You know, she was a little bit of an outsider. She was a little bit, you know, just didn't connect. And here she is at college making all these friends, finding her like people. And now her domino toppling, which is a thing, you know, she's a professional domino toppler. It's becoming bigger and bigger, and she's getting bigger and bigger gigs. And she's getting called by The Tonight Show and The Today Show, and she's being offered to do commercials. And so she's got to now do this tricky decision of, do I drop out of college? And I would say that within the first week of my filming, and we touched on this a few minutes ago, which is this idea that like, how did I know this would work as a movie? Yeah, within the first few days, she was grappling with this decision. And I remember the first interview, literally the first interview I did with her at college, she broke down in tears. It's in the movie. And it made me realize like, wow, all right, this may not be like an earth-shattering conflict, you know, but it's a human conflict that we all sort of have to we've dealt with those decisions. Do we follow this path? Do we follow this path? And I knew that would be enough to kind of, you know, lay the movie on. And
because
then
it puts
I sort
it on
of followed
its
on that
tracks.
path. Yeah.
The tracks that it gets on is that she actually is so proficient and such a leader as a domino toppler that she actually wants more, in which she wants to build a community. And so we see her teaching throughout the movie, teaching kids, showing that it's okay when things fall, because even for the pros, they fall by accident, which we see a couple times in the movie too. And it's interesting because the path she's on, she wants to launch her own domino because she knows them so well, because she had gotten away from the world to kind of immerse herself in basically playing with dominoes for so long and toppling them, that she wants to create her own. But who in the world is going to actually invest in that? And it's interesting to see her go to toy expos and to be rejected for all the right reasons. Some people saying that they just can't understand why, the world needs this, even though they like her and they like her work. And it's fascinating because, ultimately, we're in the spoiler section. She does actually get to launch her own domino, which is really cool to see.
Yeah.
But it would have been just as fascinating of a movie if she didn't.
I thought, I didn't know she was going to be able to launch her own domino line. She has her own domino line. She's on the box. It's on. You could buy it at Walmart. You could buy it at Target. And I didn't know that was, again, this comes back to your question about how do you know with a documentary? I didn't know that would happen at all. I didn't know anything about that. So I was sort of constructing the movie like, this is this really interesting story of Gen Z, of artists today. Of course, it's an art. It was a story of an artist, but I also was looking at it like, okay, this is a little bit more of a coming of age movie. And I think this connects with a lot of your listeners who are obviously so interested in scripted movies. I was thinking of movies like Lady Bird. I wasn't thinking of documentaries. I was thinking of movies like, these kind of classic stories of young women who find their voice. And that was the story that I wanted to tell. And then, this amazing thing happens where she finds a toy company to let her have her own line of dominoes, which was just stunning.
Well, I mean, and that is what the movie basically ends on. And it's a good ending point. How many hours of footage did you have of her?
I probably shot about 500, 600 hours, and also I had a lot of footage that she had, because she's a YouTuber. So it was also this whole notion where she's also filming her life. And then that becomes something that I could access for the movie as well.
Documentaries come together in the editing room, as we know. That's where the story's forged. You have to get transcriptions so that you could have a searchable text of seeing what's going on. How long does it even take to log all that? Or were you just giving it to loggers to do as you were shooting it?
I mean, I have an assistant editor that I work very closely with, who, interesting also is starting to be a trailer editor. So, he and I work very closely, and he goes through my stuff, and he and I have a sort of a great rapport in terms of he knows what I'm sort of looking for, and I think, it comes back to understanding what the kind of the movie you want to make. And it comes back to this idea where I was like, okay, this is a coming of age movie. Well, if it's a coming of age movie, what does that mean? That means that it's really, we're watching somebody develop. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we're going to kind of ride along with her, and we're going to be next to her as all these things happen. And it became less about having talking heads, interviews. Obviously, interviews are a huge part of documentaries, but for this movie, I wanted it to be more like you as an audience were kind of watching her in real time, in present tense. So, it was more what we would call like verite, where I'm just kind of like with her in these meetings, in these domino events, teaching, and you're like sort of watching it all happen in real time. A lot of footage. You need a lot of footage to make that work.
What was something that people would be surprised that you cut out? I mean, with 500 hours, we don't see any, for coming of age movies, there's usually a relationship. I'm not saying that there needed to be one here at all, because that's silly. But what was something that was really difficult for you to cut out that could have also been in there for a while?
Two things. There was, she went on a date, and just as you said, relationship.
Filmed her date?
Yeah, and I filmed the date. I followed along.
What are you doing?
But here's the thing. There were two things. One, yes, I thought it was a little creepy that I came along. And two, then she came to me and she's like,
this reality TV show?
Right, exactly. And then she came to me and she's like, it really wasn't a date. We were just hanging out. And I said, okay, fine. It wasn't a date. I'm not gonna push it in the movie. So I cut that out. But I thought that was interesting. And my instinct was like, well, yeah, of course I want to film that. We're watching this person kind of become who she is. So I wanted to film it. But so that got cut out. The other thing that a big component got cut out, which was this whole world that maybe like some of your listeners know of chain reaction artists on YouTube. This is a huge thing, what the old timers would call Rube Goldberg machines. Now it's just like chain reaction artists, and it's usually
the ball rolls down the table and it lights a candle,
and it hits a spatula, and then the spatula turns on a faucet, and then that hits another marble. So Lily was starting to get into that world. It's also a world, and by the way, we haven't mentioned at all that Lily is the only girl doing domino art.
Right.
It's all boys. So with chain reaction, it's also all boys. And it was just kind of really interesting that Lily was starting to get into that. And I had shot a bunch of scenes with her in that community as well. And I cut all those out, just, the process of elimination.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. If you've never read us before, I hope you check out our free issue over at backstory.net or via the iPad app Backstory. You could read the entire issue. And if you like what you see, I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. And to sweeten the deal, I'm here to give you discount coupon code SAVE5. Just enter that over at backstory.net and it will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. The timing is perfect because we are releasing our brand new Dune issue very soon. And this thing is just packed. We've got like 4 great Dune stories, a bunch of other material, entire screenplays for you to read. So I really hope that you become a subscriber and support my passion project. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our interview with writer, director, editor, and producer Jeremy Workman about his latest documentary film, Lily Topples the World. The one thing I was dying about was in the movie you prominently feature podcasters because it was an easy way for you to get exposition rather than it being from an interview of yours. You were just walking around with Lily when she was being interviewed, and you were picking and choosing these moments that she would tell other people that were interviewing her for podcasts, which I thought was a good way to handle some of your exposition beyond the great home movies that you had from her parents and your interviews with her parents. But the one part of the movie that really I was dying on was one of the toughest things in documentaries is to become cinema verite shots where you really are a fly on the wall. So when Lily is preparing one of her big projects, it's clear that she forgets that you're there because she's in her own world. That's easy. I could even see some cameras set up that were left. But what did crack me up was when you came with her to Spin City for the meetings and, to launch her own domino line. And she's with all these people that are twice her age. Mm-hmm. She's a perfectionist. She's giving them notes. You have cameras in the room, so they know that they're being recorded, right? As subjects, they're fully aware of what's going on and trying to act like it's a natural setting. And you could tell like a few of them, or at least so it seemed to me, just so wanted to correct her. so wanted to be like, oh, are you kidding me? Because, she's looking at the box and she's like, okay, you have a double space here between these two words. And of course she's totally right. But she's like telling these people twice her age, and anything she says is always correct. Like, that's what cracked me up. What was it like for those scenes just to watch that? Because those scenes, actually, I know that they weren't intended as comedy in any way, shape, or form. I know that people at the company totally respected her. They did end up working with her, but it was just funny to have somebody like, that's half their age, experience in marketing and these other things, like completely set them straight about, yes, do this, this, and this.
Yeah. I thought that was amazing. Like here was this, this 21-year-old who's in these meetings with these executives and sort of, explaining how to do it. And I thought it was incredible. It just showed this incredible confidence of this young woman. And I found it so awesome in a way that here she was in those spaces. And there's probably a lot to unpack there, but I just really, she was very used to my filming. I filmed enough footage and I filmed so many hours with her that she got very comfortable and just forgot about me. And part of my approach was just like, I'm just going to be there all the time. I'm always there. And the documentary is always happening. And wherever you are, that's where cameras are going to be there. She goes to Paris.
That's interesting to bring up. Sorry to interrupt, but like you're traveling to Paris when she's just doing a collaboration.
Yeah, I'm all
Greece, and like the Paris trip like falls apart because somebody accidentally, triggered the mechanism too early. And by the way, you had all those cameras. It was interesting. The most interesting part about that scene was nobody blamed each other. Nobody got mad. They were all mellow and they were just bummed together.
It's like one of the biggest fails in ever recorded.
Well, and I know that you could have gone through your footage to figure out who failed and who triggered it, but you actually don't spend any time on that. And they don't spend time yelling at each other or anything like that. But it's tough for a documentary filmmaker to do that. So was there an outside budget, or were you still self-funding by just following her around?
So and this gets into a little bit of the intricacies of the finances and the budgeting and making these documentaries that I want to make, is that since I shoot a lot and I edit often myself, I'm able to keep the budgets very low. So a budget like Lily, if it was done by Netflix or whatever, would probably have $1.5 million budget, but I'm able to do it much cheaper. And I'm able to sort of go to sort of private equity. And I have this little team of investors that get excited about projects that I'm doing. And the movies have been making money and turning a profit. So I'm able to kind of get enough budget where I'm able to kind of do, kind of run the show a little bit. And kind of coming back to the creative of Lily, I wanted this to be a story where we're riding along with her. In some ways, this is going to seem like a crazy example, but it's not much different from the Billie Eilish documentary, right? Where you're just kind of like following along this young woman as she's doing this stuff. And there's not a lot of explaining. It's a lot of just watching and experiencing and seeing it for yourself. And once I knew that was going to be the creative approach, I was like, yeah, of course. She goes to Greece, I go to Greece. She goes to France, I go to France. And there was always an attempt to like, wherever she's going, I have to be there. And that was probably one of the most challenging things, because she would get these gigs, she's invited by the Tonight Show. And I was like, okay, well, I got to be there. And they're like, well, we're not letting you in. And I was like, okay, well, I got to figure out how to get in.
So how did you get in?
It's always part of the challenge of being a documentary producer. Nobody wants documentaries in, nobody wants, you just don't want it. So, suddenly I'm like trying to convince the Today Show that the documentary needs to be there. And everybody, you just get used to everybody saying no. And then you get used to figuring out how you're going to get somebody to say yes. And sometimes I had to kind of like make deals, like weird deals. I remember with the Tonight Show, I said, I'll shoot a bunch of stuff on Lily, and I'll give you all the footage. You guys could use it on Jimmy Fallon's YouTube channel. Okay. And we worked out some deal.
Did they take it and use it?
I think they did use some of it. Not a lot.
Because they're not going to use that much of it.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes you have to kind of figure out angles.
I'll tell you what, the other thing that cracked me up, and I'm praying that the answer is yes here, is that she's with, as you said, she's the female in a guy's world. And, there's just an attitude you could see sometimes, not, by the way, a bad one. I'm not actually, there's not a toxicity element here, but it was funny because I remember one of the gigs she was in somebody else's studio, and she starts talking the team through how to shoot one of her toppling events. And I could see a few guys with just kind of eyes glazed over at first. And like, come on, kid, like, we know how to shoot. But then she says something that kind of made most people wake up. And she's like, remember, this is like a 14-second event that we're going to spend days to complete. So you don't want to be too zoomed in on this part. And she's walking down this line, explaining to them how it's going to happen and where the camera needs to be placed, which I thought was awesome. Please tell me she did that to you. Please tell me she gave you direction.
Yeah. I mean, you
direction, damn it.
Yeah. You're talking about somebody who has filmed more domino toppling than anyone on planet Earth. You know, at this point now, I'm probably in second place, but she's way, way ahead. So there were all these moments where she would do like a commercial. What you're talking about, she does a big domino topple for Lego. You know, literally it's Lego, you know, corporate. And she goes in there and she starts telling all the camera people how to do it. And it's amazing. I think it's incredible. And, you know, I think it speaks to this idea of that the confidence that she finds through doing her own thing. And, you know, I think there's also some subtext that I don't need to get into about, you know, this woman, this young girl who, if she was a guy, maybe they wouldn't look at her, you know, with eyebrows raised. But here she is, this, you know, young, small woman that they kind of like, wait, what is she? She's telling us how to do it. But she's right. She is right.
Yeah.
And
every time she's right. Tell me.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Tell me what she told you. I want to hear when she set you straight.
Well, first of all, she would, you know, she reminded me how to shoot dominoes. I would use a lot of cameras, you know, and you mentioned a couple of times the number of cameras that I had. You know, there were times when I had 7, 8 cameras. There was one scene where there was a domino topple in a museum where I crowdsourced camera angles, you know, and I found people who had iPhones and I used their camera angles, and I had GoPros and I had overhead cameras and I had multiple shooters that there's a credit additional cinematographers or something on the movie. And it's just this row of people because I would bring in shooters to kind of like just get angles, you know, everywhere. So it was often a lot of coverage on those complex domino topples. And then there was like, you know, some like kind of fun stuff that I did where I would bring in techno cranes. I would do kind of more complex cinematic stuff, but a lot of cameras.
Yeah. I mean, I was always impressed that like this YouTube generation, you know, you discussed it with the Museum of Modern Image about how there's a million hours being posted on YouTube every single day. Yeah. And how, you know, this younger generation that has access to these things we could have only dreamed of, like, you know, and just great equipment, the whole movie. I was always impressed by that.
You know what, you know, who is an interesting barometer is Casey Neistat. So Casey Neistat is in the movie. Lily does a collaboration with him at his studio.
I was exactly going to talk about that because you're a movie that really shows the artistic process and it doesn't have a lot of drama. That moment I couldn't decide on because it was somebody that she looked up to. She spent 3 days building it for his studio, and it was so clear. It was clear to me. I knew exactly what was going to happen before it happened. But, you know, the part of that world is, you know, the influence of the movie Jackass and that group of people.
Sure.
And I kind of knew that he was going to screw up whatever she did on purpose beforehand. I thought it was interesting that they allowed you behind the scenes to see that. And I was curious what her impression of that was, just really briefly, or do you think she knew that he was gonna?
I think she knew. Yeah, they basically. I mean, one thing also for your listeners, like Casey Neistat's an interesting example because like anyone under 30, he's this god. You know, he's literally like, you know, Martin Scorsese for Gen Z. Right. But most people like over 30 haven't even heard of this guy. And I thought that was really fascinating. You know, he's this huge YouTuber. Yeah, his stuff's really good. You know, he does bring like a sort of cinematic quality to his channel. It's pretty good. So Lily has a collaboration with him, and it's like meeting one of the idols, you know, one of the greats that he invites her to do this thing with her. And yeah, as you mentioned, it kind of turns into this kind of stunt, you know, this kind of jackassy stunt. But, you know, I think for that scene, it was more about this idea that here's this, you know, domino artist that's kind of meeting one of the idols, one of the gods of YouTube. And now she's been brought into that world as one of the creators, you know, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running out of time. Tell me this. What was your toughest scene? What was the scene that was really took work that you had to come back to over and over again? And how did you rise to that creative challenge?
Yeah, you know, we all know that like you could take cool domino topples and make them look cool on camera. So that in some ways, those weren't the hardest scenes. Technically, they were hard because there was a lot of cameras, a lot of footage. But the hardest scenes were definitely the stuff that really, you know, went into Lily as a person. You know, as you saw and as your viewers will see, she's not that emotive. She's not that communicative. She doesn't go into her personal feelings that much. She does put up a little wall over her. So drilling into that sort of, aspect, those kind of character details, and getting interviews with her parents talking about adopting her when she was 1 year old and how she was going to be abandoned in China if they didn't take her. Those were probably the hardest scenes to kind of put together because there was so much riding on them. They were showing a side of Lily that wasn't evident in the other parts of the movie. And
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Some documentaries have postscript sequences saying how things worked out. We saw how it worked out. Did her dominoes go okay? I mean, you show at a point where like they were going on sale. Did they recoup? Is everything still going well?
Her domino line is doing great. It's gotten bigger and bigger. She has other colors. There might be, listeners or viewers who have kids that have bought them or have seen them on Amazon. And the documentary has only made things bigger. She has her, already she was known, but the documentary is now sort of bringing her into a whole different kind of, echelon. She recently just did a PSA with Eddie Vedder. Wow. She's doing like all kinds of like, big events and big, she's a
That's
spokesperson awesome. Now. And, so it's also really cool to see that side as well.
Well, look, in the world where reality TV has so much drama and horrible, toxicity happening. And it's nice to see a documentary where it's none of that, and it's just somebody pursuing their dream. They get away with it and they're going to keep going and doing what they're doing, which is why I really dig this film. What do you want to tell us anything that's next?
I'm doing a cool project now. I can't really talk about it, but it definitely fits in my zone, where I'm just trying to find like cool stories out there. And this is another one. And I hope I'll be invited back and we'll talk about that one when it's ready.
Indeed, man. Well, thanks so much for your time and congrats on your film.
Awesome. Thanks. It's great to get to be invited back and not just kind of have to twist your arm that you have to interview me. It's awesome.
Yeah. If you didn't win South by, man, we wouldn't be having this conversation. No, I'm joking. You're always invited back, man.
Awesome. Thank you.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Thanks again to writer, director, editor, producer, Jeremy Workman for being so generous with his time and coming down and chatting about his latest documentary film, Lily Topples the World. And remember, you could watch Lily Topples the World on Discovery Plus. And if you don't yet have Discovery Plus, you could do a 7-day free trial issue, check out the film and see what else is in there and decide what you think of the service. So you could definitely see it right now. And speaking of other cool things to do online, I hope you consider checking out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. If you've never read us before, I hope you give us a test drive and read our free issue. And if you like what you see, I'm here to give you a free discount coupon code, which will save you $5 on a 1-year subscription. Just use coupon SAVE5 at backstory.net. That will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. Your login credentials will work on our website and also in our iPad app, so you'll have both. And look, it would be awesome to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page support my passion project. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. Folks, if you ever want to reach out to me, you can find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_mag on Twitter. Same 2 handles on Instagram, Yo Goldsmith on Instagram or Backstory_mag on Instagram. I also have a Facebook fan page somewhere that I need to check. If you want to drop me a note, you could also write a letter to backstoryletters@gmail.com. I won't be able to respond immediately, but I do go through it and I try and respond as best as I can. So have some patience there because I love hearing from you. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.